Hi all, this is Valdemar from Better Your Chess. In this video we're going to take a look at a game that I played recently in the National Chess League for my club Strikwerda Amstelveen. So far my adventures have included purely wins, and interesting ones I might add, but more often than not chess is not like that. Very often it is just a struggle, especially when you're playing black and your opponent is not showing any ambition, willingly or not. So for this video I've decided to analyze a boring game. Yes, a boring game. But let's try and make it as interesting as possible by pointing out some principles and sharing my thoughts and feelings. My opponent is a nice gentleman by the name of Strikwerda, and he presented Emanuel Lasker, a club from Friesland, one of our northern provinces. So I was playing with black and my opponent opened the game with d4. I played d5, and after c4, e6, knight c3, I played one of my favorite defenses, the Tarrasch defense, c7, c5. Now after this move, my opponent took at least 5 minutes, if not more, for his reply. The move c7, c5 quite often has this effect on my opponents. Shortly before the match, one of my teammates had informed me that the opposition had not shown up with their strongest players. Was my opponent a substitute for base player? Was he less well versed in playing these types of league games? It's these types of thoughts that can dominate over the course of a game and can easily lead to loss of objectivity, since you tell yourself that you want to, no, have to win this game. Fortunately, I was aware of it and it did not happen. Well, after lengthy thought my opponent played c takes d5, e takes d5, this is all theory, and now he played d takes c5. I have found an early d takes c5 to be quite troublesome for black, in the sense that in most lines the position simplifies and all black can play for is a draw. However, I don't recall anybody playing it on the fifth move. More common is that on the fifth move white plays knight f3, and only after knight c6 plays d takes c5. Now play continues d4, and then after knight a4 there is a little trick that enables black to regain the pawn with bishop takes c5, since after knight takes c5, queen a5 check, and attacking the loose knight on c5 regains the piece. So that's more common. But in the game my opponent, as mentioned, played it already on the fifth move. And again, of course, my pawn on d5 is attacked twice, so I had to put it. But after knight e4, the players were already on their own. Now, by the way, it was also possible to play knight a4, but then black can try an interesting gambit with b5, playing against the knight on a4 and also hoping to get an edge in development. But back to the game, where knight e4 was played, and now I had to consider a number of options. I considered the most natural move, knight c6, but I don't really remember why I rejected it. And then there was queen d5, hitting the knight as well, when after knight d6, bishop takes, pawn takes and queen d6, I failed to see why my queen would have to lose a tempo going to d6 in 2 moves. So instead of these options after knight e4, I opted for bishop f5. This seemed to me the most interesting option, and also the option that would keep the most tension in the position. Now, with my bishop already out, I would have welcomed now knight d6 check, because now it only takes 1 tempo for my queen to end up on d6 after bishop takes, pawn takes and queen d6. And now white can slightly go astray in this position. Probably best is something like g3, knight c6, bishop d2, knight f6, when the positions are rather even. But if he doesn't start with g3 after queen takes c6, then most options look all pretty decent for black. For instance, there is knight f3, when after knight c6 and now g3, black can for instance play knight b4. And we see that it is very difficult, if not impossible, for white to defend against this check here on c2. The knight on c2 is very nicely protected by my already developed bishop on f5. And then there is the option of after queen takes d6 going e3, but then again after knight c6, knight f3, I might just consider playing d3, and it all looks pretty decent for black, to be honest. He has this thorn in white's flesh on d3, and also his development is, I must say, very, very good. So yeah, where's white going to put his f1 bishop? I'm asking some questions here with black. So, as mentioned, after bishop f5 I would have welcomed knight d6 check. But my opponent was very alert and he played knight g3, and I think that's the best move. Now I played bishop g6, which may not have been the most precise. The alternative was bishop e6. Since now in the game white could have played the very interesting f4. Now during the game I did not take this option seriously, but the engine seems to like it. Now I can play h5, which I somehow don't like, and during the game I thought that I would probably have to play something like f6, but of course a move like f6 also weakens this Italian diagonal, so my king will also feel a little bit less secure, always feel a little bit less secure on the king side if I move there by castling. And after f6, for instance, e4 would have been possible, and yes, of course I can take the pawn on c5 now. But after knight f3, the computer may be right that white just has quite a nice position here. I think his bishop can maybe come to c4 or b5, he can castle, probably without impunity. And then these knights and these pawns, they have quite an aggressive stance, I must say. So maybe that's why bishop g6 in answer to knight g3 was maybe not the most precise. But my opponent didn't play f4 during the game, probably also thought that if he saw the move at all that it was a little bit too exotic. And he played here the normal developing move, knight f3. Oh yeah, by the way, there was another option for him in playing queen a4, but after knight c6 and b4, this might actually be a boomerang for white after the very strong reply a5. Now you figure that one out for yourself. Basically the a5 move is just aimed at completely breaking up white's pawn structure on the queen side, and since my queen is protecting the rook, this is of course now a very strong threat, and the queen is actually not feeling very comfortable on a4. So in this position black would have a little bit of an advantage. Okay, back to the game where knight f3 was played. I played now bishop takes c5, and I think positions are equal. Now white played e3. Yes, the move I did not want to see. It will give white a small pawn weakness, but it also leads to exchanges, after which there is really not much to play for either side. But I played d takes e3 nonetheless. It is the consequent move, and at least I can ask the question, who is the better endgame player? Well, first queens get exchanged, and now also bishop gets exchanged. Of course I take, because now the pawn has to recapture, and then white is settled with this, well, quote unquote, weakness on e3. It is true, he has 3 pawn islands and black only has 2 pawn islands, but it's very difficult to win this pawn on e3, especially since white's king is very close and can provide protection. And then again, it's the principle of one weakness versus 2 weakness. With one weakness, if you attack it and the opponent just simply defends it, yeah, well, why would you have an advantage, right? But if you could attack 2 weaknesses, then maybe the opponent could become overworked and you'd have better chances of winning the game. But from here, there is no such situation. Well, after f takes e3, I played knight c6, and now my opponent played rook d1 check, and I had to make a difficult decision. In the end I went king c7. Now, on the one hand, I did not want to leave my king side pawns too vulnerable, but on the other hand, I did not want to block the e-file, which I wanted to use for my rooks to pressure the already discussed weakness on e3. So yeah, the alternative was king e7, but I opted for king c7. Now white played bishop d3. Wow, he really wants to knock both sides' teeth out. I had expected something like bishop b5. But white now also wants to exchange the defender of f7, which is my bishop on g6, after which knight g5 becomes a possibility to reckon with. This also refers to what I was talking about earlier, when maybe it would have been better for my king to have a defensive stance on e7 from where it would defend the kingside pawns. But, well, the decision has been made. My king is on c7. I played after bishop d3, knight f6. As so often, the counterattack is the best defense. And I say it because I basically just ignore the exchange. I allow white to exchange bishops, and if he wants to, even to go knight g5, hitting my unprotected pawn on f7. Because in that case I would have some counterplay ready against his weakness on e3 and other vulnerabilities. Okay, bishop g6 was played indeed, and now I recaptured with the h-pawn, opening up the h-file for my rook. That's very nice. Now if my, let's say, my knight were ever to appear here, then there would be a double attack on h2 and on e3, so that's quite nice. And for that reason white played here h3, just eliminating the possibility of knight g4. Now note that the pawn on h3 is indeed protecting the g4 square. It is not pinned because the rook on h1, this one, is protected by the knight on g3. So I really cannot jump to g4 here. Now instead of h3, which is a very safe and solid move, white could have gone for the attack here with knight g5, but then I could just bring in one of the rooks. For instance, rook a to e8, and now after knight takes f7, rook h to f8, and you could see I would be really piling up some pressure on those central files. And after knight g5, rook takes e3, black even has a little bit of initiative. So I can imagine that my opponent did not want to go down this road. Well, back to h3, back to the game. Now I guess it's time for my rooks to do something useful, and I started pressuring e3, so I played rook a to e8. White naturally played king f2, protecting the pawn on e3, and now I played a move that in hindsight I am not so happy with. And I guess this also shows the amateur in me, because that's what I am. I am an amateur. I played knight e4 check here. Now I'm the one exchanging pieces, but probably because I liked the idea of my rook being active on the 4th rank. But that's really overestimating it, and also betting on 2 horses by not focusing on the one weakness on e3. I guess it would have been better or more in spirit with the position to play rook e7 and just start piling up on the e-file. For instance, rook e7, rook d3, rook h, e8, rook c1, white's also playing with the rooks, and now king b8. Now this is a far cry from an advantage, but possibly could have put a bit more pressure on white. Anyway, back to the game, where after king f2 I played knight e4 check. Not too happy with that move, but hey, it's not a mistake either. So knight e4 is forced, of course, because if you move the king, I'll just take the knight on g3. Rook e4 is forced for capturing the piece, and now yes, it is true, my rook has some mobility over the 4th rank, but what does that bring me? Rook d3. The position is still absolutely equal. White's king is doing a good job of protecting e3, and there are no other significant differences between the positions. Black even has double pawns to offset the weakness on e3, if you will. And with other differences between the positions, I also mean there are no differences between the pieces. We both have two rooks and we both have a knight. For instance, if one side had a bishop and the other a knight, then you could already say, hey, there is a serious imbalance and maybe you can work with that. But no such thing in this case. Well, what did I play after rook d3? I played rook h to e8. Perfectly normal, but the pawn on e3 is already protected 2 times. And now rook h d1. White even has a threat now. Careful, he wants to enter on the 7th, so I defend d7 with rook 8 to e7. And now white also plays a3. Very prophylactic thinking, ruling out any rook before possibilities. And now the ball was back in my court. I played now f6. This is really the only plan I could see. It does not involve attacking enemy weaknesses, but rather getting rid of my own. An important principle when thinking of what you should be doing in a position. If you don't see an attacking plan, then why not improve your own position? With the move played, I aim to push my double g pawn to g4 to exchange it for the h3 pawn, thereby getting rid of my so-called weakness. It's nothing, but hey, it keeps me from the street, I guess. Also, the pawn being on f6 somewhat restricts the knight on f3, right? So, decent, solid. Okay, rook c1. Now knight d4 could be disturbing. White has some play of his own. Okay, I will move away from the center, so now my knight on c6 is not pinned and knight d4 is not such a disaster. Here comes rook d c3. Now don't touch your knight on c6, that would be mate on c8. So again, knight d4 is maybe white's idea. a6, safety first. Now king and knight are free again. Knight d2. White lets go of e5. Maybe I can jump there later with my knight? Okay, but first let's save the rook. It's being attacked, right? So I retreated to e6. Knight b3. Now this could threaten knight c5, hitting the rook, but also the pawn on a6. And after that, my b7 pawn could prove to become overworked, because if I must recapture on a6, then my knight on c6 is attacked twice, so that could threaten to win a pawn for white. Not very nice. Well, okay, I sidestep all that with rook d6, threatening sometimes to enter on the second rank, but for the moment, of course, the d2 square is protected by white's knight. But if white would now go knight c5 indeed, then rook d2 check, king f1, rook takes, knight takes pawn, king takes, and rook takes c6. It would still maintain the balance as well for white. But why allow black's rook on the second? So after rook d6, my opponent played rook 1 to c2, and yeah, here we go, stage 2 of my plan, g6, g5. Well, here comes white's play, knight c5, threatening knight takes a6, but my knight saves itself, goes to e5, and it is now ready to support g5, g4. My plan, my master plan. White played b4, and this made me wonder if I should not have played a7, a5 earlier on to stop this. But I also liked it, because white is pushing pawns on the side of the board where I have an extra piece. My king. King a7, little pawnies, Papa is coming. Well, since I was ready to play g4, instead of king a7 I also considered g4, but then I just didn't see how to continue after h4, so I decided to keep g5, g4 in reserve. Back to the game, where I played king a7, and my opponent now played king e2. Rook c6. Time trouble was approaching, and I did not really know what to do. That's the problem with this position. There is nothing useful to do. White played a4. Is white going to have a dangerous initiative on the queen side, or are these pawns just getting closer? Now I played b6. That was a bit of a nervous decision, to be honest. I decided to release some of the pressure by exchanging one pair of rooks. The white pieces had been on my nerves for quite a while now. Now, probably objectively better, but ever so slightly better would have been to play rook b6, hitting the pawn on b4, when I could continue with rook b3 and now g4, h4, f5. That was just another way of playing, but not necessarily better than what I played in the game. I mean, positions are so balanced that you can also not clearly indicate the best move in the position. So back to the game where I played b6. Well, the knight retreated to b3. I exchanged one pair of rooks now and moved my king a bit closer. Position is still completely equal, but I still had hopes. Maybe because of what my teammate had told me earlier. Of course, I was watching my thoughts, but you know, we're human. During a game, you always have hopes. You just want to win the game. That's why we play chess. Knight d4, rook d7, and now white decides to engage. b5, contact between the enemy forces. White creates an anchor point on c6. But then again, landing there on c6 is not necessarily advantageous for him. I played here rook e7, not much to be done, and now white could have landed on c6. But I guess that after knight c6, knight takes, rook takes, pawn takes, rook e5, black is the one trying here. I don't think white is in any danger, because he can have his own counterplay with rook d6. But after rook b5, rook d7, king c6, rook g7, rook b2, I suppose black is still the one trying, but it's not a winning position, it's just an equal position. So knight c6 was possible, but maybe my opponent just didn't like the exchanges on b5 and then this type of attack, rook e5 hitting the pawn on b5. So after rook e7 he did not go knight c6, but rather he went knight f5, hitting my rook and pawn. Well, I had to stay on the 7th. Knight e4, repeating some moves. Uh-oh, are we headed for a draw or repetition here? Nope. King f2, rook f7. And I suppose in time trouble I miss a tiny opportunity here. Instead of rook f7 I could have played a5, which fixes the pawn on a4, and if my knight were to arrive on c5, that would again ask some questions. Okay, well, I simply didn't have time to look at the consequences of a takes b5 or a5, but I played one of those moves anyway, because in time trouble, yeah, okay, you're not just completely alert and present, so to say. So back to the game, rook f7, knight f5 again, rook d7, repeating some moves, knight d4, and well, I realized that if I wanted to continue playing, I had to do something, because otherwise it's just going to be a draw or repetition. So okay, I decided to alter the structure, but again I could have done it with a5, that would be a better option, but I played a takes b5. Now I suppose a takes b5 was the most solid way. It would keep my king in the box. But on the 40th move my opponent opted for knight takes b5, and this gives me the very tiny opportunity of sometimes moving my king up the board and attacking this pawn here on a4. A theme that we were talking about earlier, right? White has been pushing his queenside pawns on half of the board where I have an extra piece, my king. So in that sense I was welcoming it. And now it also gives me the opportunity to bring in my knight with tempo, because my 40th move was knight e3 check, and after king e2, knight c5 attacking a4. I'm also making use of the opportunity that white can now not play a5, when I could not take that pawn because my knight on c5 would be hanging, because after a5 I would have the double attack, king a6 hitting the knight and the pawn, and that would be advantageous for black again. So after knight c5 my opponent played rook a3, again solid. So I went up the board. Here comes Papa again, king a6, threatening king a5 with advantage. But fortunately for white, he can defend knight d4. Now, if I now go king a5, that would be a horrible blunder, because there would follow knight c6 check. I have to go back to a6, and then there is this horrific fork on b8, winning the game for white. So, by means of tactics, white defends against my king coming in. So it's this c6 checking square that I have to take away from the knight. So I played rook c7, controlling that square. But here comes knight b5 hitting my rook, so again there's no time for king a5. Rook e7, knight e4, same story. I cannot go king a5 because of knight c6 check picking up the rook. But now I thought, why not return to the old theme of g5, g4? I played rook e4. But again, white stopped me by attacking my rook. That rook is of course protected by the knight, but yeah, if I now go g4, then of course white is also controlling g4 two times, so that would not be possible. Well, I now decided to gain some space on the king side, move my pawns so they could influence some squares on white's half of the board, and I started with g6, possibly preparing f5 and g4 after all, which was ruled out by white with an ugly move, g2, g4. But now h3 is weak, right? So I went back again, rook e8, toying with the idea of both rook a4, looking at the weakness here, or the idea of rook h8, looking at the weakness here. And the latter idea seemed to have escaped my opponent's attention, because he played here king e2, and now I played rook h8. After this move my opponent was visibly surprised, but he finds the toughest defense nonetheless. Knight b3, exclamation mark. All rook endgames are drawn, dear opponent. A tough move to meet, and I spent most of my time trying to make knight takes b3 or rook takes h3 work, but I could not. I therefore played something else. But first let's look at both of these possibilities. Knight takes b3 is insufficient. This was really my main line. Rook b3, rook takes h3, because now after rook d3 white's rook becomes active, and he will have enough counterplay after rook h4, rook d6, rook takes g4, rook takes f6, creating a passed pawn for white on the e file as well, very important, rook a4 and rook g6. And since white now has counterplay with his own passed pawn, black cannot really win the position. For instance, g4, king d3, king b7. You may want to check out these lines for yourself and find some improvements, but I think there are none. And now just keep checking the black king. And it's very difficult for black to make progress. So, and then after knight b3 there was the immediate rook takes h3, but that also doesn't work, because now white initiates the trade and also has a passed pawn on the a file. Rook c3, hitting the pawn on c5, trying to protect, but a check, king c6, and now a5, etc, etc. So this position is also unwinnable. Well, fortunately I realized that both tries were not sufficient for an advantage. So after knight b3 I decided to keep the knights on the board, and I played knight e4, also exclamation mark. Those are the only two moves that I provided with an exclamation mark. Knight b3 and knight e4. And I could have been a little bit successful actually, because white played now a mistake, king f3. And after this move he should have gotten a harder time than he did, since after exchanging some strong moves we now exchange weak moves. Here I should have played, and maybe you want to try and find out for yourself. Let's pause the video if you like, and I will count to 3 and we'll compare answers. 1, 2, 3. I should have played here knight d6. I completely failed to see this move. Maybe I didn't look for candidates in the first place. Don't forget, this is already 4 hours of play or something like that, and we were at the 50th move, and I guess players were not so fresh anymore. So yeah, I completely failed to see this move, which sets up the double threat of rook takes h3, but also knight c4, hitting the rook and the pawn on e3. So if white decides to protect the pawn on h3 with king g3, he's got to let go of the protection of the e3 pawn, right? But then knight c4 comes, rook a1, and now knight e3 is possible, and maybe even stronger is rook e8, trying to come in with the rook on e3, checking and also picking up the knight on b3, when after rook e1, rook takes, and knight takes, black really has some winning chances, and this would have been the best position I could have reached throughout the whole game. Okay, I could really try here. I stopped analyzing here because it's maybe not even so relevant to try and find out if the endgame is really winning. The most important thing is during a practical game to realize that this is the best position you will ever have during this game, and that you will have to go for it, and that you will have winning chances. Okay, but unfortunately I did not play knight d6 after king f3. I played the somewhat natural looking move that I also had been preparing. So this plan was also somewhere wandering through my mind. f5. Just keep your knight in a central spot. Protect it, yeah? And if he exchanges on f5, I will recapture with my double pawn. I will have dissolved my double pawns. I'm still hitting h3 here. Looking good, right? Yes, looking good. But indeed, white now takes, I recapture. And after king g2, there is no knight c4, hitting the rook on a3 and the unprotected pawn on e3. That's the difference. So I had to find another plan. Now one of the tries here was g4, but after h takes, f takes, knight e4, rook c8, I think that white just maintains the balance with a move like rook a1, rook c3, and now, okay, white would need to find this idea, but still, rook e3, rook f4, g3, and now rook f3, and yeah, it's all equal. So in the game, after king g2, I tried rook c8. But now, my pawn on f5 is also unprotected, so there is a target for white as well. Knight d4, rook c5 protecting, king f3, and here I saw nothing better than knight d2 check, and after king e2, knight e4, king f3, knight d2, I offered a draw, which was agreed. We were just going to repeat the position. Unfortunately, well, I suppose the one good thing about this game is that I scored the first points for our team of Amstelveen, because already 5 games had been lost by my team, and I was the first one to put at least half a point on the scoreboard. But of course that could not save the whole match for the team. Well, with that we have come to the end of this video. Did you enjoy it? Then please consider liking, commenting or subscribing. And if you're watching this video from YouTube and you want to play back this game in a JavaScript player, then click on the playback link below in the more section. That will lead you to my website betteryourchess.com. gmail.com. Thanks for watching, and hey, be careful out there.